Hurricane Florence made landfall in North Carolina on Friday morning, menacing the coast with life-threatening storm surge and Category 1 strength winds of up to 155 km per hour. The storm was crawling westward across South Carolina Saturday night with sustained winds of 80 km per hour. The storm's death toll had risen to 15 by Sunday afternoon. By early Sunday morning, Florence had weakened to a tropical depression, but concerns over flash flooding and major river flooding are expected to continue over portions of the Carolinas. The storm is 560 kilometers wide and has dumped more than 60 centimeters of rain on some towns. Hundreds of people have been rescued as nearly 1 million homes and businesses are without power. Airlines canceled more than 1,200 flights, and airports closed in Wilmington, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and points farther inland. Airlines are bracing for more travel disruptions to come from Tropical Storm Isaac, which threatens vacation destinations in the Caribbean. The Red Cross is raising funds for what is expected to be far-reaching damage. The onslaught can last for days, leaving a wide area underwater from both heavy downpours and rising seas. Surviving this storm will be a test of endurance, teamwork, common sense and patience, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper said Thursday. Florence made landfall Friday at 7:15 a.m. ET, near North Carolina's Wrightsville Beach, the U.S. Hurricane Center confirmed. Hurricane force winds extended 150 kilometers from its center, and tropical storm force winds up to 315 kilometers. On Saturday morning, the downgraded Florence was moving at a meager 4 km per hour west over the mainland, crawling through South Carolina with sustained winds of 80 km per hour. At 5 a.m. Sunday, Florence was about 35 km southwest of Columbia, South Carolina. It has top sustained winds of 55 km per hour and is moving west at 13 km per hour. At times, Florence was moving forward no faster than a human can walk, and it has remained such a wide storm, 560 kilometers wide, that its counterclockwise winds keep scooping up massive amounts of moisture from the sea. The storm is slowly weakening as it moves inland, and is likely to weaken to a tropical depression by Saturday night, according to the National Hurricane Center. Florence's route to the U.S. coast has been difficult for forecasters to track. The weather systems that usually push and pull a storm disappeared as the storm neared land. The center slowed down and is expected to stall, but it could also wander around just offshore. Either scenario could be devastating. The more it stalls, the more it rains, but the more it hovers offshore, the more potentially deadly storm surge it can push on shore. This is a horrific nightmare storm from a meteorological perspective, University of Georgia meteorology professor Marshall Shepard told Associated Press. "We've just never seen anything like this. This is just a strange bird." Florence's fury began to reach the Carolina coast on Thursday, inundating coastal streets and knocking out power to nearly 1 million homes and businesses by Saturday morning. That number is expected to rise. The first of storm-related fatalities were confirmed Friday afternoon. The police department in Wilmington, North Carolina, said a woman and a baby were killed when a tree fell on their house. A husband and wife died in a Fayetteville, North Carolina house fire on Friday, the state's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner says. A mother and her 8-month-old child were killed when a massive tree crushed their brick house Friday, according to a tweet from Wilmington, North Carolina police. An 81-year-old man died while trying to evacuate Wayne County, North Carolina, on Friday, the state's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner says. A 78-year-old man was electrocuted in the rain while trying to connect extension cords for a generator, Lenoir County, North Carolina spokesman Brian Hanks says. A 77-year-old man died after he went outside to check on his hunting dogs and was blown down, Hanks says. 3 people died in Duplin County, North Carolina because of flash flooding and swift water on roadways, the Duplin County Sheriff's Office said on its Facebook page. A 61-year-old woman was killed late Friday when the vehicle she was driving struck a tree near the town of Union, South Carolina, Captain Kelly Hughes of the South Carolina Highway Patrol said. Authorities say the storm did not cause some other deaths that occurred during Florence in North Carolina, a woman who died of undetermined causes in a shelter, a woman who suffered a heart attack at home during the storm, and a couple whose apparent murder-suicide was investigated during hurricane conditions in Otway. Some towns have already been soaked by more than 60 centimeters of drenching rains, and forecasters warn that totals could reach 1 meter, unleashing floods well inland through early next week. Rescue crews used boats to carry more than 360 people from rising water in the river town of New Bern, North Carolina, while many of their neighbors awaited help. Dozens more were pulled from a collapsed motel. Pamlico River in NC has risen beyond its banks and is flooding entire neighborhoods. Floodwaters submerged US Highway 264, cutting off a major route to other flood-prone areas along the river and the adjacent Pamlico Sound. The storm surge had reached 7 feet on Emerald Isle, North Carolina, and as high as 10 feet in other areas. Downtown New Bern, on the Neuse River, also is flooded. The city tweeted early Friday that 150 people were awaiting rescue. The TV station in New Bern, WCTI TV News Channel 12, was forced to evacuate its newsroom in the middle of Hurricane Florence coverage as floodwaters surrounded the building. The station posted on Facebook Thursday that the employees had to abandon their studio for the first time in history. The station's journalists were out in the weather Friday, reporting on the impact and posting updates to the station's Facebook page. Hurricanes are one of nature's most powerful engines of destruction, turning warm seawater into wind and rain. Here's a look at how those devastating forces played out in Florida. For a more detailed primer on how hurricanes form, read more here. Wind. To be classified as a hurricane, a tropical storm has to have top wind speeds of 119 km an hour or higher. Earlier this week, Florence had maximum sustained winds of 225 km per hour, but slowed down to a Category 2 by Thursday and a 1 by Friday. Technically, a hurricane doesn't have to make landfall to lash a coastal area with its strongest winds. The U.S. National Hurricane Center explains, landfall means that the center of the hurricane has crossed onto a coastline, and the precise center isn't where the strongest winds are. Past the 119 km per hour threshold, the U.S. Hurricane Center classifies storms in 5 categories of wind speed. Storm surge. A tropical cyclone is essentially a giant vacuum of swirling water vapor, and the more powerful it is, the more water it sucks from some parts of the ocean to move to others. At one end, this creates astonishing drops in the water level, leaving boats and marine life stranded on exposed ocean floor, and at the other end, it creates storm surges, flooding streets and homes. Rain. More than 50 centimeters of rain is expected from Florence, possibly causing catastrophic flash flooding and significant river flooding over a wide area of the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic states, the National Hurricane Center announced. A computer simulation known as the European model, which is the same model that accurately predicted last year's Hurricane Harvey, predicts some places could be hit by as much as 115 centimeters of rain. Harvey also stalled over land and dropped more than 150 centimeters of rain in the Texas area. Atlantic Beach on North Carolina's Outer Banks Islands had already received around 75 centimeters of rain, the U.S. Geological Survey said, while more than 60 centimeters have fallen in the Newport, Morehead City area since Thursday. Another concern from an immense amount of rain is the toxicity in water supplies. North Carolina has roughly 2,100 industrial-scale pork farms containing more than 9 million hogs. Florence's heavy rain could cause an environmental disaster if waste from hog manure pits, coal ash dumps and other industrial sites washes into homes or threatens drinking water supplies. Hurricane Florence is unusual in that it struck at the Carolinas from the east. Typically, storms that become hurricanes come to the U.S. East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic from the south, and curve outward to the sea. Most storms that hit the coastal U.S. tend to track further south near the Florida Keys, thanks to the jet stream that stretches across the northern United States. But since summer heat extends later, The jet stream has not moved the storm in the same way, and Florence is on a different track than most storms. The last Category 4 hurricane to barrel straight toward the Carolinas was Hurricane Hazel in 1954, which was famous for its destructiveness. It was the deadliest and costliest hurricane of the 1950s, making landfall near Calabash, North Carolina before traveling along the Atlantic coast and affecting Virginia, Washington, D.C., West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. It was felt in Ontario as an extratropical storm and caused severe flooding. Florence is the most dangerous of 3 tropical systems in the Atlantic. Tropical Storm Isaac was expected to pass south of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba, while Hurricane Helene was expected to weaken over the eastern Atlantic. Some 1.7 million people evacuated the area along the coast of North and South Carolina and Virginia. Service stations started running out of gas as far west as Raleigh, North Carolina, with bright yellow bags, signs or rags placed over the pumps to show they were out of order. Some store shelves were picked clean. People began boarding up the sides of buildings and the windows, while many stocked up on supplies. Steady streams of vehicles full of people, belongings and pets flowed inland Tuesday and will continue today, which has been declared the last day to safely evacuate. Governor Roy Cooper encouraged everyone on North Carolina's coast to flee. Floridians, usually accustomed to fleeing hurricanes by going north, began welcoming Carolinians coming south. Florida hotels offered special discounts for hurricane evacuees, and Florida ports opened their terminals to cruise ships making unexpected ports of call. Days before Florence's landfall, U.S. President Donald Trump vowed that federal agencies would be ready. "Don't play games with it. It's a big one," he said in a videotaped message from the Rose Garden. For Puerto Ricans, Florence has brought back memories of the devastation from last year's Hurricane Maria, and Mr. Trump's widely criticized response to it. On a visit to the U.S. territory after Maria, Mr. Trump praised officials for a low loss of life, in a disaster that ultimately turned out to have 2,675 deaths, instead of the 64 initially estimated. Mr. Trump spent Thursday arguing on Twitter about Maria's death toll, claiming without evidence that 3,000 people did not die. He also called the count a move by Democrats to make him look bad. San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz fired back at Mr. Trump, calling him delusional. Mr. Trump is expected to travel to areas hit by Hurricane Florence next week, once it has been determined that his travel would not disrupt any rescue or recovery efforts, the White House said on Friday. The Red Cross has already set up a way to collect donations for relief from the impending storm, while fellow metropolis areas in Atlanta, Georgia and as far as Detroit are offering help and shelter. Global Affairs Canada is advising Canadians not to travel to the storm-affected areas. Canadians who are already there can register with the department, which can provide consular assistance if needed. With reports from the Associated Press, New York Times News Service, the Canadian Press, Globe Staff and Reuters,